Good afternoon, YouTube. Tired Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully, you guys are doing well. Well, today's Sunday. It's going to be another quiet day, but you know that's not why we're here, unfortunately. So, I was talking about this in yesterday's video, and now we've had a new addition as well. We have two risk for severe weather towards the end of the week. We have a day 5 and day 6 slight risk, and we're going to go ahead and tackle those today. We're going to be analyzing both threats as a whole. So for right now, while I do think that this area is prone to changing and probably expanding a little bit, we have a day 5 slight risk here across Oklahoma and Texas right now. I do see potential for this to stretch further to the north and east. So watch out if you're over towards Springfield, Arkansas, and parts of maybe even western, and even could be even looking at central Kentucky, parts of the southern Ohio Valley here. And I think the threat with this one really is all hazards, honestly, based off the parameters that I've been looking at before I started the video. So keep an eye on this. We may see upgrades to this as well. There's still plenty of time for this to change. And then on day 6, we have a pretty broad area that started to come forth now. This was a little bit small earlier this morning, but now that we've reached lunch updates with the weather models, we've seen greater threat existing here now. So we're starting to see an increase in this area developing here, where our day 6 slight risk stretches all the way from just to the east of Houston, all the way into Nashville and parts of southern Kentucky yet again. So we'll be watching this area. Again, this looks like an all hazards type event, including the threat for tornadoes. Some potentially could be strong from the looks of it. Not trying to scare anybody, but from what I've seen on the models, it definitely seems plausible at this point. I can't really take anything off the table. So that being said, let's go ahead and look at some of these models now. This is the GFS we're looking at first here. We're changing up the order a little bit. This is looking into Thursday afternoon. Very big trough. Very big, very strong trough here. Getting up to 80 to 90 knots. And this stretches, you see how far this spans. This stretches all the way from desert Southwest all the way into the Great Lakes and even parts of the Northeast here. Strongest winds are going to, of course, be a little too far to the north to really for these storms to access that. But even then, this 80 to 90 knot mid to upper level jet is more than sufficient enough for severe weather. As we draw this forward, we'll continue to see that intense jet go into the Ozarks and then eventually the southeast, which will lead to a multi-day severe threat. And one thing to note here, and this is always something I pay close attention to when looking at these forecasts here, is the amount of forcing in the direction of these wind barbs. Because when we look at the low-level jet in a minute, I want you to pay attention to how that evolves, because that's going to be a key factor in potential supercell and tornadic development. So these isobars here, the further apart they are, the more likely you are to see more discrete supercells, because when they're in tighter like that, that represents a lot of upper air forcing, which is important for storm development. Yet, if you have too many storms in the same area, they start to smother each other, and you'll get damaging winds, but the tornado threat will be more limited. When you get those isobars a little bit more spread out like you're kind of seeing right here, that leads to a chance of discrete supercells. Of course, there's other factors that go into that as well, like moisture returns, temperature, etc. But considering what I showed you on yesterday, where we had an abundance of a warm sector, I don't think supercells can be taken off the table at all. If anything, I think this favors it. That being said, here's the look as we head into Thursday night into Friday. We see plenty of force. We see plenty of forcing towards the late evening hours, but before then, the forcing is pretty subtle. So there may be a window here where we could see potentially a few tornadoes there towards especially Texas and Oklahoma. I do think a severe threat will exist a little further to the north and east here. There is a warm sector that's abundant enough. The question will be the forcing. And I do think there's enough forcing for there to be a couple of severe storms, even as far north as the southern parts of the Ohio Valley. So southern Illinois, southern Indiana, even maybe even northern Kentucky, we'll have to be watching you guys. Western Kentucky, I'm definitely thinking you're in that as well. So as we go to Friday, it's a pretty similar look. Threats a little bit further to the south. Still an abundant warm sector here. Plenty of 70, 80 degree temperatures will be in this region here. And we still have that subtle forcing as well, which is never a good sign. So with this wind direction here that you see from the wind barbs, it's kind of pushing a little bit into that northeasterly direction. So we have a pretty good idea of which way the storms are going to be moving. That's pretty common for the southeast especially. But when we look at that low-level jet and the moisture returns, this is where we're going to start to see why I'm a little bit more invested in this day. So this is heading into late Friday evening, early Saturday morning. Threat will finally start to diminish at this point, and then we'll have another storm system to deal with to start out that week. We make our comparison with the Euro. It's a pretty similar deal. Jet streak isn't quite as strong with this one. Euro kind of tends to favor a little bit away from severe in comparison to the GFS, but it's still very much prevalent. In fact, I think this leans more so into a threat for Friday, but it also seems like it's lagging back a little further, which could mean maybe less storms, but maybe even a nocturnal event. Also, the jet streak towards the mid part of Friday actually looks a little bit more impressive to me, if anything. So we could see a storm mode in which we could see tornadoes, and then with this line of storms, depending on where this ends up, we almost see 100 knot we almost see a 100 knot upper level jet here, which could be a big problem because you could have multiple rounds of storms, and that line of damaging storms being able to potentially have access to that 100 knot upper level jet could be a big problem. Looks like it's going to be a pretty big wind event across the board, even if you don't get severe weather on the backside of this. This threat also looks like it could linger into Saturday too. Could be across the Carolinas, parts of the southeast here, and even the mid-Atlantic. I can't rule it out. Warm sector is still pretty abundant by this point, but I do think it's going to be an early Saturday type of threat, maybe mid-Saturday. By the evening on Saturday, heading into Sunday, I think the threat will be gone by that point. Oops. Let me go back to the winds here, and we're going to go ahead and look at that low-level jet. I'm going to flip it back one more time here. I'm going to try to flip it back one more time here, so that way, to remind you, this is what our current wind barbs were looking like as we were heading into Thursday. Right here. Remember to take note of this, because by the time we look at the low-level jet, it's going to look a little different. And whenever you see the difference between those wind barbs, that's when that's when it's going to kind of click. It's going to be like, okay. But you can see here's our wind barbs. It's Friday. It's Thursday. So now that we've seen that, here's the low-level jet here. We're going to jump this all the way up to Thursday. We're going to jump this up towards Wednesday morning, and then creep our way into Thursday. Can you already see the difference? We have this broken piece here, low-level jet energy that's snuck its way through the Rockies. But notice, and I'm going to actually draw it for you even. Here is what our upper level jet was doing. Wind was going this way, and you can see this wind barb going this way. These two will end up intersecting, and we're going to have some good directional shear here along with speed shear. So basically, what we're seeing now, we have speed shear where we're getting up to about 80 to 90 knots on the upper level of the atmosphere. Towards a lower level jet closer to the ground, it's a few thousand feet over our heads, we're getting up to about 50 knots plus. So speed and directional shear there. So that's one big check mark with the severe weather event potential. So wind shear is definitely going to be a big thing with this system. No questions asked. And as we head into Friday, this low-level jet is going to be even more impressive. And this is where my concern for tornadoes really increases, especially as we look further up towards the north here. It's going to be pretty prevalent across northern Mississippi and Alabama. But Tennessee and Kentucky here, we're watching you very closely as well. So throughout the course of the evening on Friday, we're going to be watching that area for increased severe weather, especially as we head close towards those Appalachians here. I do think that could also play a part in things as well. That's what the GFS low-level jet is looking like. The Euro, there's been a lot of model agreement between the two, so there's already increasing confidence with this. And really, I see no reason to believe that will look too much different. In fact, again, just like with the Euro on the mid to upper level jet, it's a pretty similar deal. It's a little bit more out of position here in comparison to the GFS, but very strong low level jet, similar directional shear, similar speed shear. And then as we get into Friday, this looks like it gets more intense, but actually looks a tad bit more on the linear side of things. So depending on how this jet maximum or this wind maximum ends up being shaped could determine a lot here. I think with this one, this would limit the tornado threat just a little bit on Friday, but I think that either way, the potential for tornadoes is definitely there. The potential for damaging winds is undoubtedly there. Hail is a little bit questionable, but I do think it's likely. So let's go ahead and start looking at some of the temperatures and the dew points, and then we'll even take a look at some lapse rates here as well. As I mentioned before, I don't really need to show too much with this. We already know by Wednesday the warm sector really starts to develop. Look what happens as we head into Wednesday evening. This is the day before the event. We're seeing temperatures nearly at 80 degrees over towards Dallas. It's trying to creep its way even into Oklahoma. So that being said, we already know warm sectors in place. Cold air not too far behind it either. So I do think some good lapse rates are going to be in place. Hail threat's going to be pretty impressive with this, especially further out towards Oklahoma and Texas. Can't say that it wouldn't be prevalent across areas like maybe Arkansas, Missouri, especially with there being a boundary right here for these storms to develop and fire off of too. The convection between the cold and warm air often leads to higher lapse rates as well. So this is what we're looking like Thursday evening, and even across the southeast. Your severe weather threat doesn't start till Friday, but we're seeing temperatures into the 70s as we're almost heading into 8 o'clock. So we end up seeing this go forward here, and by the time we get towards noon on Friday, a lot of the southeast getting into the 70s and 80s. That's getting into pretty dangerous territory. I remember plenty of outbreaks getting nasty because of those temperatures and the dew point returns, or moisture returns, I should say. So this could be a big problem. And even looking into Saturday, there's a pretty abundant warm sector that still remains over here. So there could be a marginal to even slight risk for this day as well. This could be a 2, maybe even 3-day outbreak. And that stretches even pretty daggone close to the towards the state of even Pennsylvania. We'll have to watch, you guys. I think the threat's minimal there, but over towards the mid-Atlantic coast here, we might be in for a little something. We're going to be keeping a close eye on that. That being said, that's what the GFS is looking like. This is the Euro. It's a pretty similar deal. Like I said, there's been plenty of confidence between the models here, or a lot of model agreements, so confidence is pretty high. Temperatures are just as abundant through Thursday, Friday, and even into Saturday. In fact, it looks a little bit more impressive on Saturday. The warm sector even tries to spread a little bit further to the north and east here. Even parts of western Pennsylvania could be in play. There's a lot of other factors that are going to go into that. We'll try and keep that in mind as we go forward here. But either way, Thursday through Saturday has definitely made my radar, and we'll see what ends up happening with it. There's a few things I might need to fidget around with, but I may even try to live stream this. A lot of it will depend on work and a couple other things on my end personally, so see what happens there. So now we can already see by Wednesday, moisture returns are already in great abundance across Texas, southeastern Oklahoma, and even into the Ozarks now. And then by the time we get into Thursday afternoon, that moist sector really starts to kick it into high gear here, stretching all the way into the southern parts of the Ohio Valley. And this is why I think that even though it hasn't been mentioned by the Storm Prediction Center as of yet, between that jet streak and this moist sector, a little bit of that warm sector as well, I think that storms are very much possible to fire along this corridor here. Anywhere along this corridor, I could see potential for severe. And it almost has a look of a slight like dry line-esque setup, even though the dry line is really going to end up being here. But even then, conditions seem favorable enough to where storms will fire here, especially with it being potentially closer to that low pressure center, where lift is going to be great. So with that being said, we'll drag this into Friday now. And that moist sector, it looks even more intense as we go into Friday evening, Friday afternoon. And this is what's really got me concerned about an increased tornado threat. I'm almost kind of scared to look at these soundings at the moment, but even though this says marginal tornado threat, look at this low-level curve on the hordeograph. This definitely already has the indicator of a supercellular storm, pretty discrete in nature. A little bit off towards this end of the hordeograph, but the fact of the matter is everything seems to be in place. Cape seems to be the only thing that this is lacking right now. But I think that this could very well uptrend given the fact that we have the temperatures that we do. Dew points, I don't think Cape is going to be that big a problem. But yeah, look at the dew point here, 67. Air temperature 71, and very strong low to even mid-level helicity. So could be pretty problematic here. And then on top of that, even with the sounding analogs, even though there isn't quality matches yet, when you see these pink letterings here, that's leaning more towards significant tornado. So if something develops here, it has the potential of being significant. Let's hope that factors remain limited and confidence on this is low. For right now, it says marginal tornado threat. I'm going to click one more spot, looking towards the sounding. And with this, interestingly enough, we're leaning more towards the linear side of things. I don't really see anything that's screaming out towards a significant severe threat at all. In fact, with this one, the Cape's limited, I think we ended up being behind the front here. So find that a little bit interesting. So that being said, here is what Saturday looks like as well. Started to nerd out a little bit here, but towards the mid-Atlantic, we still get a pretty good moisture return here. It seems like this front kind of elongates itself. It kind of drapes itself over the southeast and into the Atlantic. I think it's a lengthy looking front on this one. And then it really takes that second storm system that could be expected on the 27th here to really move things out of here, move the parameters out of here completely. So it could be a very active next few days towards the end of this upcoming week here. So here's what the Euro is looking like. Oh, went a little too far there. This is heading towards Wednesday. Pretty similar deal. Moist sectors in actually less abundance with this in comparison to the GFS here. But it looks pretty much the same. Soundings will look a little bit different with this, though. So we're going to go ahead and move over to somewhere like northeastern Mississippi here. Hordeograph is actually less impressive, but we were actually kind of expecting this due to the fact that we were talking about potentially more of a linear look, and this does look like it's the case. Storm looks like it's getting cut off here a little bit. Maybe competition with other storms could be a factor here, but there's still a pretty decent low-level helicity curve right here. So we're seeing 144 meters squared per second squared. And when we look at the cape value, the mixed layer, it's not very impressive. The surface cape is a little bit more impressive. And this might be one thing that could inhibit things, is that the ingredients up towards the higher levels of the atmosphere are a little less favorable than what's going on at the surface, but surface base is usually more than enough too, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Look at the air temperature, by the way, 80 degrees. Dew point is 62. Still could be plenty of dynamite in the atmosphere. And I do think that there is a chance that these cape values will uptrend. We're still very far out. So usually when you see 400, 500 joules per kilo dew points, there's a good chance, and I mean a really good chance, that it could uptick, considering we're 5 to 6 days plus out. So this is looking into Saturday afternoon. Carolinas definitely look like they're in play for some storms, potentially even severe. And then, of course, by Sunday, the ingredients are starting to move out for now. And then, of course, the 27th is another animal to tackle within itself. So now that we've talked about that, let's go ahead and look at some lapse rates here and look at the surface cape as well. So we'll compare the lapse rates of both the GFS and the Euro, and then we'll just look at the surface cape on the GFS, because Euro actually has mixed layer cape. Mixed layer cape is not very impressive with this storm at all. So here are our lapse rates. The brighter the colors, it's pretty simple. The brighter the colors, the stronger the lapse rates are. So this does not necessarily associate itself with severe weather entirely. This just shows dry air pockets usually within the atmosphere, usually caused by, geez, my brain's not working. Usually lapse rates are caused whenever there's dry pockets of air in the upper levels of the atmosphere. That's usually what we're looking at when we're seeing this indicator here. In fact, it's even mentioned right here as we're looking 700 millibars to 500 millibars. It's about 10,000 feet plus into the atmosphere. Oops. Cannot get this thing to stay still. There we go. So the lapse rates are starting to pick up around southern Texas as well. Not as high as what I've seen, especially in that last outbreak where we were getting significant hail, but definitely seems possible. As we head later into the evening, I think the threat kind of increases a bit. I think it's mainly going to be staying over towards Texas, but really, as a whole, the hail threat's going to be a little bit more minimal in this situation. The dynamic kind of lends itself more so towards tornadoes than anything else. There could be a greater hail threat with that storm system that's coming in around the 27th. We'll cover that probably more so during the earlier part of this upcoming week. I already feel like this is going to end up being a pretty long video, so I'm not trying to overwhelm anybody or myself for that matter. Because once you get to about 20 or 30 minutes, I start to get a little bit more sloppy. So here we are looking at the Euros version of the lapse rates here. A little bit stronger lapse rates, I will make note of that. Still more so in the same spots here, but focus definitely seems to be more so on Texas for that increased hail threat. Not to say that southeastern Oklahoma is out of play, but as we head into Friday here, lapse rates kind of drop off a little bit. There could be a couple of spots here and there where we could see some increased threat for hail. but I think more or less we're leaning more towards a wind and tornado threat on this one. Again, as we head towards that next system on the 27th, that's going to be something to watch a little bit more closely for hail. Let's jump back to the GFS here, and we'll look at the surface-based CAPE here. All right, so here we are looking into Thursday evening. Surface-based CAPE, pretty sufficient here, especially across Texas. Oklahoma is not quite as impressive. But as we head into Friday, this is when I would start to see these values really start to pick up a little bit more. Especially over towards Louisiana, I think there's a big chance of some storms being of some significance there. Then, of course, over towards Mississippi and even parts of Alabama, we're watching you guys closely. Again, one thing to note is these are not going to be final CAPE values. These are going to be changing. These are very much interchangeable, and you don't really get a good idea of what's going on here until usually the convective models come into play. So that's usually about 60 hours out. So we got a good couple of days here to see how these develop. So by the time we get towards Saturday evening, Sunday, the highest value of CAPE are pretty much out of here at this point. So I guess the last thing now is to kind of look at the storm mode we could be seeing, more so the precip type on this. Again, one thing to make note of is the fact that with us being so far out, it's going to be kind of hard to zero in on everything right now. But considering how the threat looks at the moment, had to be covered. So that being said, here we are jumping into Thursday afternoon. Here are storms firing here. Again, look at this is what I've been talking about right here. These storms over here towards the Missouri region, over towards the southern Ohio Valley, southwestern Ohio Valley. Definitely worth keeping an eye on. Could see a line of storms with that. Could see a linear mode as well as we go through the Ozarks to start out Friday morning, and then we could see some potentially discrete action over here, but this definitely favors more of a linear mode, and that could even persist as we head into Saturday. Euro's kind of leaning more so against it, though. This is what the GFS is, or actually I'm looking at the GFS. GFS is showing more of a linear mode than what I last saw on here a little bit ago. And then the Euro, we're going to push this forward all the way to Thursday afternoon. Storms fire a little bit further to the south with this setup. Could be a strong line of storms over here towards the southern part of the Ohio Valley. It doesn't quite make it as far north as the GFS does. But there is there's a few tendrils over here, even towards the southern part of Texas here, that we'll need to watch. We start to go into a linear mode here, just like with the Euro on Friday. But I can't rule out a few prefrontal storms with this. This leans a little bit more into it based off the precip model, which I find a little bit odd. I was expecting more of a linear mode with the Euro than I did the GFS. I'm not going to lie there. And then heading into Saturday afternoon, these storms do start to weaken at this point. But a few storms are still possibly going to be severe, especially towards South Carolina based off this look. Like I said, there's still a lot of things to figure out, but confidence is definitely increasing for a severe threat this weekend. Could be 2 to 3 days of potential severe weather. All hazards seem like they are on the table. Whether they're discrete, embedded supercells, or just a QLCS, we could be seeing some very significant weather, folks, so make sure you are practicing your precautions. March 20th is spring, so you guys already know the deal across a lot of these regions. This is nothing new to us. So just make sure you're on your toes. Make sure you're prepared to take shelter if a warning of significance is issued. That being said, that's the end of this video. You already know what to do if you enjoyed it or if you found it useful. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Definitely share this video because this could be a pretty notable outbreak if conditions continue to come into alignment properly like we're starting to see here. And then, of course, let me know in the comments if you happen to be in an area of interest for severe weather. But that's it for today. This has been Tire Metalhead Weatherman. See you guys tomorrow. We'll talk about more of the wintry side of the system because there is a pretty prevalent one with it as well. With this as well. So I'll see you then. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.